Welcome, everybody, to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we take a deeper dive into the sermons each and every week, sharpening our minds with truth and encouraging one another in our daily walk, all through the joys of conversation. I am your host for today, Caleb Pearson. Joining me is Jessica Oplak. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for being here with us. And then in the pulpit this weekend, Carey. Mark, how are you?
Fine.
Good.
Yep.
Thanks for being here. We want to take this opportunity to dive deeper into the Gospel of Mark, talk through kind of what stood out this weekend, what we're doing here at Fellowship Bible Church, especially as we look to the Easter season, and then what's beyond that as far as a sermon series and all that is concerned. So, Jessica, I'd love to come your way first, kind of share some thoughts on the weekend, and then we'll hear from Mark if there's anything on the cutting room floor, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I always enjoy when we have the full orchestra up there and seeing everybody with their different instruments. It's always just a picture of the church to me, everybody playing their part, and it's just beautiful to watch that and enjoy that in worship. I think as the sermon goes, I really spent some time meditating on the kindness of Jesus and what does that mean, and what's the difference between being kind and being nice. So that's kind of where I was looking at things this week. And in those final moments of Jesus here on earth, how did he choose to spend his time? Because he could have been nice and he could have been like, let's eat, drink, and be merry, and let's recount all the glorious times we've spent together. But he doesn't, and he chooses actually to continue serving, to continue wrestling, invite them into that wrestling as he's trying to surrender to the Father, and eventually does choose that, but he invites them into that with him, and of course they fail him again and again. But I just love that picture of what's kind, what's nice, and I think in your opening stories, those people chose action. Like they were moved for empathy, but it actually took them making decisions and sacrificing. And I think that's where it came. So nice, we can be pleasant, we can appease, we can be constrained in our social conduct and what we're doing, or we can actually sometimes have to go against that in order to be kind and do what is actually right.
It's the idea of costly kindness. Being nice doesn't necessarily cost anything. It can be nice.
Yeah.
But, and being kind, but it has that idea of taking it a step further, tied with love, which is ultimately sacrificial. So it could have been emphasizing the costly love of Jesus, but it hit me, that Titus 3 passage, but in the kindness of God. And then the Ephesians passage, that in the ages to come will show forth the surpassing riches of his grace in kindness. So that stood out to me in the study. So that's why I wanted, what I saw Jesus doing sacrificially, we could have just focused on his love. That was all love in action. But sometimes we don't think of it as his kindness. He was being kind to we who didn't deserve it. So good point. It goes beyond, he was more than just nice.
Yeah, and I think there's this cultural view of Jesus and as Christians, and I'm not a man, but I imagine what you guys wrestle with. We're supposed to be nice. God was nice, and he was kind, he's love. Well, sometimes to be kind and to be loving is to speak the truth and to prepare people for the hardship and help them walk through that. And I think that's just a really great picture of what it means to be a Christian man.
Yeah. And that's what's so fascinating about getting to this point in the Gospel of Mark, because it almost feels like we've been teeing up this Passion Week the whole time. Mark has been vividly describing all these interactions of Jesus' time in ministry, but now he's elaborating because we're getting to the cross. And so even over the last couple of weeks, Mark and I had to decide, we were both preaching through chapter 14. Where are we going to hand off here? And we're covering a lot of scripture. And so with that in mind, Mark, what are some things that you're like, man, it could have been nice to elaborate on that? Or did you provide any kind of digging deeper questions, things to study and note? Because there's so much. So much there.
In fact, as you say that, I had a conversation with Micah Dirksen, who's going to be preaching next week. He said, "Hey, would it be okay if I lobbed off the end of chapter 15 because it seems 14? To go better?" No, he'll be in 15
of his. I see what you're saying.
Lob off it.
Sure.
So we're adjusting on the fly as we go here. To delve into the costly kindness of Jesus. If this would have been like a BTC class or something, I would have enjoyed going more deeply into some of the things that Mark doesn't talk about, because Mark's gospel is very condensed
compared to the others.
Yeah, and you gotta you got to do a harmony of the gospels to kind of see how all this fits. I was doing that because on Easter Sunday I'll be preaching on chapter 16, the resurrection. Well, Mark is real short on the 8 verses basically, and it's like, well, how does this fit with? And almost looks like there's contradictions because so it's putting all that stuff together to get the full picture. And I was curious, why did Mark focus on like the trial at Caiaphas's house? There was so going deeper. There was Jesus succumbed to 6 different trials. There were 3 religious trials and 3 kind of civic trials. So when they took him from, and I mentioned this, but when they took him from Gethsemane, first place they went was the former high priest, and the grandfather of all the high priests was Annas, the high priest, who had been high priest in Jesus's growing up days, but had been run out by the Roman emperor. He did something wrong in I think it was AD 18. So his son-in-law Caiaphas had become the high priest, but it was all an intertwined, interwoven, corrupt family that was going on. So they went to Annas first. So Jesus had that trial first at Annas the high priest. Then Mark picks up with the second trial, which is at Caiaphas' home, and that was the intense one with that. And Mark does it's an interesting how he laid out all the stuff that went on in Caiaphas' house in some more detail. It's like from verses 53 to 65. So there's a number there. So Caiaphas is the sitting high priest with the Sanhedrin assembled. Then when we get next week, Mark chapter 15, verse 1, it says, early in the morning, the chief priests and the elders of the scribes and the whole council immediately held a consultation. Well, so how does that go with what we just read? Well, again, Mark's version's condensed, but Jesus, that was actually a third trial. And they did it in the early morning because now it was legal. After the sunrise, then it fit there. So they brought about the actual condemnation of Jesus. It just shows the hypocrisy of these religious leaders. So those were the kind of the 3 religious trials. And of course, then there were the 3 civic. The first trial before Pilate, and he sends them to Herod. Then he comes back to Pilate, and then he's crucified. So all that Jesus went through. The other thing that would have been fun to delve into, I just mentioned it. The Sanhedrin had hundreds of laws about how they were going to govern themselves, and Arnold Fruchtenbaum he's a Jewish believer, Christian believer. In his work, what is it called, Messiah, Jesus Messiah, or something, whatever it is, he's got the Gospels. He's kind of has a harmony of the Gospels on Jesus. He goes in there and shows at least 22 laws that they broke of their own laws, meaning at night, the false witnesses. I mean, these guys, they were snakes, and Jesus called them, whitewashed sepulchre. He called them snakes, and I mean, he had them pegged. This is what he was up against, and then he submitted himself to that and the false, and he stayed silent. He didn't answer until Caiaphas asked that question: "Are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And of course, he wouldn't hold back then. Yes, I am, and quotes from Daniel 7. So there's so much more behind the pages in the drama and what Jesus went through in those early morning hours, probably from 2 a.m. till 5, that he endured and submitted himself to.
And that's a real tension for this narrative we're doing, this series, because A, there's more in the Gospel Mark that we could elaborate on, but then B, there's more in the Gospels that he didn't choose to elaborate on. So like even a question for you, Jessica, as we've been going through this series, Had you read Mark before? Are the other gospels? I feel like we turn to them so quickly because they have more, or the stories are longer, maybe. Yet we kind of teed up this series as this is a vivid author, so he's not going to use a lot of words, but he is going to use a lot of meaning. What has it been like for you to study this book and sense that tension that he's saying? There's a lot more to this story that's not in this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to think back if I had studied through Mark. I've read through it. I've done like the Bible in a year plan, so I've read through it all, but I don't think I have specifically studied Mark. But even at the Last Supper, I was trying to figure out, well, doesn't he give Judas the bread, and that has like that it goes back to in a Seder meal, it's the Hallel piece of bread. And it's like you give it to someone you love. It's actually an offering of affection. I don't think Mark mentions that.
Right.
So I was going back through and reading that. There's a lot that he leaves out, but I think his focus on immediately this and immediately that's very action packed. And I wonder if that's because of the influence of Peter in his life.
Yeah.
Very.
Or maybe he's trying to protect Peter because a lot of the other stuff that could have been full didn't make Peter look good.
Somehow, randomly, somebody did something. Yeah, there's a lot of those details, like even that the Last Supper I had to teach through, and even the idea of not just betraying somebody, but betraying them over a meal or with food involved. There's an intimacy broken, and there's so much there, but we still get to serve this same purpose, mighty Messiah. Yeah. Now he's full on suffering servant, and then Mark has this opportunity coming up to merge it with Easter, and also what FBC has been doing this whole time. So.
You think of the original readers, the people he's writing to in Rome. Did they have a copy of Matthew's gospel? You know, Mark's was probably the earliest, so maybe that was the first one circulating. So obviously, under divine inspiration, in Mark's 16 chapters, he included enough.
It's enough
to because even talking about Judas, one of the 12 that's mentioned twice in chapter 14, that would maybe force people to go back to Mark chapter 3. That when Jesus, selected the 12 and took them up on the mountain, it says he wanted them to be with him and to send them out. Judas was in that whole picture all along. But there's so many things that Mark leaves out, but it's enough to get
his
the
authorial
picture,
intent,
right? To convey what the verse that he started out with. This is Jesus, Christ, Messiah, the Son of God. And then he begins his whole gospel account, laying that out. I think next week, not to take away Micah's thunder, but next week on the cross brings us to that the kind of crescendoed climax of Mark's gospel, really. And then we're getting ahead of ourselves, but then we're going to crash after the resurrection and see how Mark ends his gospel. Kind of amazing. But those are just some of the things I wanted to bring out: the different trials, and the violations, that the hypocrisy that Jesus succumbed to. Pretty detestable what he went through.
Do you think there's any connection? I hadn't thought about the 3 trials, but Jesus goes to the disciples 3 times in the garden and tries to get them back into prayer. There's the 3 trials.
Rooster crows.
The rooster crows. There's, denying of Peter. Do you think there's anything to that, or?
Probably. But
there's a tension to it because it's in there.
Right.
But you can also get into this crazy, about the numbers thing. And then maybe add meaning that the author didn't intend. But
Sure.
What really stands out is just the specificity of Jesus. He's not only is he saying what will happen, he's saying what will happen so specifically that he's in charge. I could vaguely tell you it'll be cloudy tomorrow. A huge chance I'm right. But if I, down to the degree, am able to say something to where when it happens, you're like, wow, he nailed it. So Jesus lays all that out in a way that he nails it. And then even to the Peter thing, Mark's account, which is brief, is clear. The rooster crows once, and then he's still denying. Wouldn't you?
Right.
Wouldn't you want to be like, oh boy, that's a rooster, and I'm one away? But he wasn't. He was still focused on all that, and then the rooster crows twice, and then now that there's a fulfillment, he realizes what he did. Jesus is just so on top of it in an account where he's under it.
Yeah. Now, there again, Mark leaves it out. I happen to mention, I think, in one of the messages, but in John's gospel, when that rooster crowed again, Jesus glances over and he sees Peter. So maybe was it the rooster crowing, or was it the eyeball
Sure.
of Jesus that
ties it to ties it.
Now, interesting, none of that happened with Judas. Judas is in the garden. He's betraying Jesus, and it's eyeball to eyeball. And he was the one that Jesus had given the Passover meal. Even though I brought up the passage there, those are the bookends of the passage: the treachery and betrayal of Judas, and the fear and denial and betrayal of Peter on the bookends, with the focus of Christ in the middle. Yet those two are really different too. Mm-hmm. There's a real contrast between, they're both despicable acts.
Right.
Peter wept, and Judas tells them to take him under guard, take him away under guard, and looks him in the eye. And Rabbi, that's a pretty stark contrast, even though Mark puts him in such a way that the real emphasis is on how Jesus is in total charge and total command, even while all this is happening. But
there's one overt, active rejection, and then there's this passive rejection in the sense that Peter's choosing something else, focusing temporally, and at a point where we can read through this book and be like, Peter, why are you still doing that? I mean, the way Mark writes it, he probably skips a lot of really fun evenings with them and Jesus, singing and having fun. But his point is, look at their failures and look how God still accomplished everything he accomplished.
One question that is raised, I think, in the passage, and it's an interesting question related to the combination of Jesus' humanity and his deity. Hebrews 5 talks about that he learned obedience through the things he suffered. Now, when that suffering began, well, it would have had to begin in the womb, you would think. I mean, all through, he was the one who set aside his divine privileges, and how much of a God awareness. I mean, to me, that's a mystery. As a baby, as a young boy, as all
an omniscient God learning something.
Yeah, right.
Where do we?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and yet he made the comment here in our passage, as he tells people, basically, put up your swords. Have you come with me as swords and clubs? I was in temple with you every day teaching, and you did not seize me. But then he said, but this happened that because the scriptures must be fulfilled. We know, like when Jesus, at the beginning of his ministry, when he was tempted, he quotes scripture. He had that last week, and we looked at those passages in chapter 12 and of he being confronted by the religious leaders and questioned. Well, what about this? Should we pay taxes? And Jesus had such a command of the word. He obviously knew that Judas was, Psalm 22. Psalm 22 is written about him. I think that was fully a messianic psalm. I don't think there was a David connection. David is writing about the one who is coming.
Right.
And it's all, it's all in there. What an interesting thought to wonder how Jesus, as he's growing up and as he's even the 3 years of public ministry, how much he studied the scriptures and knowing that this. So when he comes to Zechariah 13:3, the shepherd is going to be seized and the sheep are going to be scattered. This is happening to fulfill scripture. It was like nothing was going to get in the way, even his own safety and well-being. He'd pray. He settled that in the garden. He settled it in the garden, and there's such resolve. We brought it up that week before. Time's done. I mean,
you're right.
It's
time.
It's enough. It's time. Boom. And there's such command. The scripture is going to be fulfilled, and Jesus knew that.
And even in his prayer, Jesus asks, "Is there any other way?" So is there any other way for this to be accomplished. He could have said, let's just not do it.
Yeah.
He could have asked, let's make there be no way this happens. But instead he's asking, okay, is there any other way that this can happen? And it just shows God's intent in his designing in the raw humanity of Christ in the garden, and then the resolve from that for Christ, from that decision on. The moments on the cross between him and the Father are different because of the moments between him and the Father in the garden.
Yeah.
And it's this
and that
resolve.
And that had to be the crowning jewel of his time with the Father, because we know from earlier in Mark, he gets up early in the morning to spend time with the Father. That was in chapter 1. So all along, and then he starts heading to Jerusalem, and it's really Luke's account that said he's kind of set his face like flint to Jerusalem. So he knows he's on a mission. Mark chapter 10, verse 45, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, give his life. And that's going to be in Jerusalem. So he's going there, but in the hour of greatest agony is that final time with the Father. And then it's like, Scripture must be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And so put away your, we're not fighting this thing, Peter. Mm-hmm. And then they all fled, and he just is in such command in Caiaphas's house, and as well, and being beaten, and the soldiers saying prophesy when he certainly could have. I think that's the other thing. It stood out so much is that Judas could have been fried to a crisp right there in the spot, and everybody else in that.
That's something that stood out to me when you said that he had just prophesied. And I was wondering, well, why? Why would he take the time to do that? Mm-hmm. He warns Peter. Did he have to do that? He could have been focused again on like temporal things, like I'm about to really suffer. I'm going to live it up tonight and go relax. Mm-hmm. But he warns them, I think, just to preserve that relationship and to go before Peter. Like, you're going to endure these things. This is going to happen, and prepare him for that. And that was such kindness that God did that for him. And then I actually struggled as I was going back through this to sit in that betrayal of Peter, because I know it's coming. I know that restoration is coming. And I was just like, okay, but focus on this part. But I know that God is so gracious, and he redeems, even restoring him around a fire. Yeah. And in one scene, he's trying to keep warm and provide for himself. Another, that God is feeding him. Like, it was just such a beautiful thing. And I know that was coming on the other side of it. So I struggled to just be like, okay, but he did betray, but he didn't focus. Yeah. But again, God prevails always. Yeah. And just the picture of he's going to tell them this so that he doesn't flee and turn away from God.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've grown, Jessica, in your appreciation of the Old Testament as we've done this stuff? Because I know I certainly have, because you realize exactly how many things are being fulfilled, whereas it's very easy for us to normally just jump to the Old Testament, get through it, read it, we get it, Jesus died. But the depth and breadth of everything that's happening is affirming Scripture, and that's exactly what Jesus is using all the time. Like, have you felt that?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like they should have felt that. Like, he's doing that to communicate to them, and they're not seeing it again and again, even though they devoted their lives to studying the Scriptures and trying to keep to the extra laws that they made that they're pulling. And they didn't get it. And it's just amazing to me. It's so clear.
Yeah. I made a comment a couple of times in a message that the religious leaders had to know who they were crucifying. Although one guy came up to me a couple of weeks ago and said, is that really true? Because he brought up the comment on Jesus on the cross, where he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And whether that was maybe just the Romans that were actually doing the pounding the nails, that may be more just about the Romans. Right. The religious leaders, I mean, it's such a sham, the fake, the trials and all that stuff of Jesus. They just were so evil and hateful, and self-centered, because Jesus, their fear was he was taking away their little fiefdom. And and yet even within there was Nicodemus. He was willing to meet with Nicodemus. There's Joseph of Arimathea. And we know in Gospel, or the book of Acts, many priests, many of the religious order of Judaism had come to faith and we're coming to faith. So we don't know the whole story. What happened to Malchus? Even though his name wasn't mentioned, he was you get your ear lopped off and healed by this guy that you want to see die.
Right.
The stories in heaven are going to be fascinating. Fascinating.
It's good. And they'll continue to be fascinating as we kind of move towards Easter. So let me just share a couple things before we get out of here. I want to let you guys know that Good Friday is obviously coming up April 3rd. We'll be doing a 4 p.m. service and a 7 p.m. The 4 p.m. service will have nursery and preschool. And then obviously we're setting our sights on Easter Sunday. Saturday night will be a normal 5 o'clock service, and then an 8 and a 9:30 and 11. So good opportunity. Obviously invite friends and family out, and we'll be able to focus on the Easter content, but also it works well with our sermon series that we've been doing a year and a half now here at FBC. So Jessica, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Mark, thank you.
Yep.
As a reminder to our listeners, sermons are not just heard, but they are lived. We'll see you next week.